Hi, I'm Milena, welcome back to my channel, and today I want to share some wintry book recommendations with you. I am a big seasonal reader and I just love seeing elements of the season that we're in books. When I think about winter, I think about just a moody, little bit of gothic, but not too much, atmosphere, snow, rain, just all the things that I associate as someone who lives in Western Europe with winter. So I have a few books that I think really hit the vibe of winter, but I have a few books that really have that cold element, but also just a moody atmosphere, or books that are literally set in December or January. I mainly have historical fiction and classics, but I also have two middle grade that I would love to recommend to you. So let's start with the middle grade. The first one is more of an author recommendation than a specific book. That is one of my new favorite middle grade authors, and that is Ross Montgomery. Two books that I read by him are The Chime Seekers and The Midnight Guardians. I think The Midnight Guardians is more of a wintry book and The Chime Seekers is more of an autumn type book, but I think both of them would really work during winter. But for the sake of a wintry book, I'm going to recommend to you The Midnight Guardians. This is set during the Second World War, and a young boy wants to save or find his sister, who is a nurse in London. He goes on a journey where he is not at all safe, and his imaginary friends, or are they imaginary? It's a magical middle grade, start helping him in this quest, and it's absolutely adorable. At parts this book is quite heartbreaking because of the setting, but the friendships, his imaginary friends and a friend that he meets during his journey is wonderful. I wanted to keep on listening to this one. Just the same with The Chime Seekers, which is set more in a world of mythology and anything Halloweeny. So whichever one speaks most to you, I would recommend that one. Then another, I guess also author recommendation, but I do want to really specifically recommend one book, and that is The Ogress and the Orphans by Kelly Barnhill. I'm sure you've heard the name Kelly Barnhill around because The Girl Who Drank the Moon is a very well beloved book by her, but her newest book is The Ogress and the Orphans, and this is set in a town where everything is kind of going wrong. Everyone in the town keeps on getting less kind, and this is also set in a magical world. Cannot say too much about this plot. There's an orphanage and there's also an ogress who no one really sees and knows, but who does a lot of kind things for people in the town. This is a middle grade that I wouldn't recommend necessarily for an original plot, which I really do like more with Ross Montgomery's works, but just the magical element is so wonderful. The element of kindness and friendship is so alive in this book, and I think it is absolutely perfect for winter. I have three classics that I would absolutely recommend because of the moodiness of them. The first one I want to recommend is Eaten From by Edith Wharton. It's been a while since I read this, so I cannot exactly say if it's set in winter, but it has that Wuthering Heights quality of moodiness. We meet Ethan and he is a farmer. He has married a woman with whom he doesn't have a great marriage. His wife's cousin comes to the farm to help them out. Ethan starts to develop more feeling, more sense of soul, more sense of self, and we follow Ethan through those emotions as his setting is very grim and poor. The emotional journey and the other characters. I find this quite a hard book to talk about because it's so thin and it's just something that you need to read, but this is like moody, wintry vibes, and I think I recommend this quite often just because it's so good. If you are a fan of Wuthering Heights, then you should absolutely read this. A book I read quite recently that definitely has the wintry moody vibes is Jamaica by Daphne du Maurier. This starts out with our main character Mary traveling in a carriage. It's just raining and there is strong winds and rain, and she is barely surviving in her carriage as she is driving through this storm, which to me is so moody, so wintry. And she goes to this desolate place called Jamaica to live with her aunt and her uncle. This again has the moodiness in both setting and like the gothic vibes, but also it's usually cold in this book. I think when I talked about this book I said that this is not necessarily a good starting point for Daphne du Maurier, but if you've read a few Daphne du Maurier and you want something extremely moody and atmospheric, I would definitely recommend Jamaica One of the first classics I ever read was Frankenstein by Mary Shelley. I'm sure you know what this is about. We follow Victor Frankenstein, who creates the monster of Frankenstein. The monster doesn't have a name, but this was very surprising to me because I thought this would just be another horror book that I'd read kind of before. I thought this would be like the films, but it's not at all, because we really follow the psychology of all the characters. So of the doctor and of the monster of Frankenstein, we follow the monster who wants to develop himself intellectually, emotionally, in society, which is just so interesting. The relationship between the monster and Frankenstein was something that I found surprising, I think I'm going to call it. But why I recommend this as a winter book? Of course, it's super moody, clearly, but it's not all set in winter. But we have one part that is set in an extremely cold and desolate and dangerous place, which I think is why I would call this a very wintry book. And if it is like snowing outside, if you are cold, maybe this will not warm you up, but it will definitely be a wintry book. The last classic I want to recommend is North and South by Elizabeth Gaskell. This is about Margaret Hill, who moves together with her mother and her father to a town in northern England where I think it's a manufacturing town, where she sees and meets a lot of people and she learns a lot of things that she just didn't know before when she lived in a more rural town. It was very interesting to see such a working life that also we don't know anymore, at least I don't know anymore, from Margaret Hill's perspective, and to see everything through her. This also has, I want to say, great romance, but I think the romance feels so great because we have the reference of the TV series. I didn't necessarily love the romance as I was reading this book. I don't know, but I always really feel like Gaskell and Dickens are very wintry authors. I always really associate their work with winter and Christmas. Maybe it's just because of Christmas Carol, but I think this would be a perfect pick for winter as well. I also need to, of course, talk about historical fiction because there's nothing I like to read more in winter than historical fiction. So we just mentioned Charles Dickens, so of course you can read Charles Dickens, but I am not going to recommend Charles Dickens because I am not his biggest fan. A book about Dickens that I really quite liked, wasn't mind-blowing but I did like it, is Mr. Dickens and His Carol. This is an historical fiction that imagines Charles Dickens as he writes A Christmas Carol. This has some magical elements as well, a small magical element that I'm not sure how I felt about it, but I did think it had a place in this book. The writing is lovely and fast-paced. Samantha Silva is one of those authors that I think gets better with every book. I think this is one of her earlier works. Just very cheeky, I'm also going to recommend the book she wrote about Mary Wollstonecraft. That one is so good, but not necessarily wintry. This is definitely wintry because it's of course set during December. It's set during Christmas. And one of my favorite things in this book was Charles Dickens' wife and how she celebrated Christmas in the house with so many people. They had a lot of children. They had quite a nice house and she decorated the entire house for Christmas. This was this big event for her. Just loved it. Charles Dickens as a man. Another book that really reminded me of Dickens, and especially of A Christmas Carol, is Small Things Like These. This is a very small book, and the setup of this book is that we are, I think it was the 1980s in Ireland, where we follow a man who sells coal to everyone, and we follow him during Christmas Day, Christmas evening and Christmas Day I think, when he makes some emergency deliveries to different people who want coal. This is a lot about the same kind of themes you would see in A Christmas Carol, where it's about money, about charity, about whether or not you help people if it costs something for yourself. The setting of this book is beautiful. The main character is gorgeously written with a lot of depth, and he is just really likable as well. I gifted this to my grandma for her birthday. Would definitely recommend gifting this to anyone. It's very readable, it's very beautiful. I just think everyone will like this book, especially during Christmas time. Another book I would like to recommend is Mrs. England by Stacey Hulse. Stacey Hulse is one of my favorite historical fiction writers. It's very readable, very atmospheric. Stacey Hulse is one of those authors that when she writes, I always have such a visual experience. This is about a woman who goes to a certain nursing school. This is a very prestigious nursing school, so she has her first job in which she's very happy, but those people move to the US. She does not want to go with them because she wants to stay close to her family, and then she decides to take on a last minute job because she needs a job, money and everything, at the house where there are 4 small children, I believe, that she has to take care of in a very desolate house. And you can hear the Jane Eyre bells ringing. I don't think this is an adaptation of Jane Eyre, it's more like Rebecca, but Rebecca was based on Jane Eyre, so it's a book that follows that line, which is of course a formula for success. This book wasn't flawless, but I did have a wonderful time, and I think anything that has like a moody house is perfect for winter. The last book I want to recommend is Norse Mythology by Neil Gaiman. Granted, it's been a while since I read this, but I think Norse mythology in general is great. For winter, I really liked Neil Gaiman's writing in this book. It is very readable, which is a word I'm using a lot in this video, but that's usually what I'm in the mood for when it's winter. It's a very entertaining take on especially Thor and Loki. I really liked the way Neil Gaiman wrote Loki, and I am considering rereading this myself this winter. So those are the recommendations for today. Let me know if you are a seasonal reader and if you are looking for books that are really set during the season that you are currently in. For now, I hope that you have found a nice recommendation for this winter, and I hope to see you in another video. Doei!